Pharmacy smelled like antiseptic and cheap floor cleaner, the way all pharmacies do in November, when everyone is already sick and already tired. Lena Marsh stood at the back of the line with her 7-year-old son pressed against her side, his forehead hot against her arm even through her jacket. She had counted the money 3 times in the car. $41 and some change. That was what she had left after rent, after the electric bill that had crept up without warning, after buying the half-gallon of milk and the loaf of bread that would have to last them through the week. $41. She had told herself it would be enough. She had needed it to be enough. Aiden had been running a fever for 4 days, not the kind that breaks overnight and leaves a child limp but cheerful by morning. The kind that climbs. The kind that made him stop asking to watch cartoons, stop asking for anything at all. Which scared Lena more than the fever itself. When a 7-year-old boy goes quiet, something is wrong. The pediatrician had seen him that morning, a rushed appointment squeezed in between 2 others, and sent them out with 2 prescriptions. An antibiotic for the ear infection they had found, and a second medication for the inflammation that had settled into his throat. The doctor had said both were necessary. She had written both on the same slip without hesitation, the way people write things when they do not have to think about whether they can be paid for. Lena had not said anything. She had smiled and thanked the doctor and walked Aiden out to the car and sat for a moment in the parking lot before she pulled up the pharmacy's website on her phone to check the prices. The antibiotic was covered by the state insurance mostly, the second one was not. $22.80, after whatever partial coverage applied. She had stared at that number for longer than she should have. $22.80. In the abstract it was nothing. It was a lunch. It was a streaming subscription people forgot they had. But it was not nothing to her, not that day, not after the electric bill, not with Aiden burning up in the back seat asking her in a small voice when he was going to feel better. She had driven to the pharmacy anyway. She would figure it out at the register. She was always figuring it out at the register. The line moved slowly. The woman ahead of her had a question about her insurance that required 3 different people and a phone call to resolve. Aiden leaned into Lena's side and she put her hand on top of his head, feeling the heat of him, smoothing his hair back the way she had done when he was a baby and could not tell her what was wrong. He had been 4 when his father left. Not left in the dramatic sense, not a fight or a single bad night. Just a slow withdrawal that Lena had told herself for months was stress, was the economy, was the pressure of a young family. Until the withdrawal was complete and he was simply gone, moved to another city, sending child support that arrived irregularly and in amounts that seemed to correspond to no particular formula. She had stopped expecting it to be consistent. She had stopped expecting it to be consistent. She had stopped expecting a lot of things. She worked at a dry cleaning shop on Millbrook Avenue, 40 hours a week when they had the hours to give her, fewer when they did not. The owner was not unkind, but the business was small and the margins were thin, and there were weeks when Lena went home with less than she had budgeted for and had to sit at the kitchen table after Aiden was asleep and move numbers around on a piece of paper until they added up to something survivable. She was 34 years old. She had stopped telling people she was fine. The line moved again. She was almost at the counter. She shifted Aiden's weight slightly. He had stopped standing on his own and was now simply listing against her, which meant he was getting tired, which meant the fever was still high. She pressed her lips to his temple for a second. Still hot. Almost done, buddy, she said. He didn't answer. When she reached the counter, she gave both prescriptions to the pharmacist, a young woman with reading glasses and a tired but patient expression, and waited while she processed them. The antibiotic came back quickly. The second one took longer. There was a pause. The pharmacist looked at the screen, typed something, looked again. The second one is coming out to $23.40 after your coverage, she said, not unkindly. Just factually, the way people say things they say 100 times a day. $23.40. Lena had 41 and some change. She did the math without meaning to. After the antibiotic small copay, after the second medication, she would have somewhere around $15 left. And that $15 was supposed to cover gas. And she needed gas to get Aiden to school on Monday if he recovered, to get herself to work, to get back and forth to the grocery store by the end of the week when they would be out of everything. She stood at the counter and understood that she could not buy both. It was not a complicated calculation, it was just a terrible one. She looked down at Aiden. He was staring at the display of cold medicines on the rack beside the counter, not really seeing them, just resting his eyes somewhere. He had dark circles she had not noticed until this week. He looked smaller than he had in the summer. Can I? She stopped. She started again. Is there a generic for the second one, or anything that would be? I already applied the generic, the pharmacist said gently. This is the lowest it comes. Lena nodded. She was not going to cry in a pharmacy. She had decided this approximately 40 seconds ago. Okay, she said. Can I just take the antibiotic today and come back for the second one? She already knew what she was going to do. She was going to come back on Friday when she got paid. She was going to give Aiden the antibiotic and hope it was enough for the next 4 days and come back on Friday. She had done worse math than this. She had made worse stretches work. Of course, the pharmacist said. Lena reached into her purse for her wallet. Get both. The voice came from behind her, calm, not loud, just clear. She turned. The man standing behind her in line was somewhere in his mid-40s, maybe, with the kind of face that had been outdoors a lot, not rugged in a performed way, just weathered, like someone who had spent real time in real weather. He was wearing a canvas-work jacket, the kind with the corduroy collar, a little faded. He was holding a small paper bag from the pharmacy counter that suggested he had already picked up his own prescription from another window and had simply gotten back in line. He had a coffee cup in his other hand, the disposable kind from the gas station down the road, not from anywhere that cost $4. He was not who she expected. He was looking at her, not with pity exactly, but with the kind of directness that made her feel like he had heard everything and was not going to pretend he hadn't. I'd got it, he said. Lena shook her head immediately. No please, that's really. My kid had ear infections every winter from about age 4 to age 8, he said. I know how this goes, get both. He said it the way someone says something that is not up for debate but also is not a command, like he was just reporting a fact about the world. Like paying for a stranger's child's medication was a reasonable response to the situation and he did not understand why they were still discussing it. Lena looked at him. He looked back. Aiden pulled on her sleeve. Mom, he said, in the thin voice he'd had all week. She turned back to the counter. Okay, she said quietly. Both. The man stepped forward and handed the pharmacist a card. It was a regular debit card, the kind with a chip that sometimes didn't read on the first try. He did not make a show of it, he just handed it over the way people hand over cards at pharmacies and it went through, and that was that. Thank you, Lena said. She turned to face him properly. I'm Lena. Patrick, he said. He said it the way people say their names when they're not sure what comes next and they're okay with that. They stood in the slight awkwardness that follows an unexpected kindness when the moment is too large for small talk but too public for honesty. Aiden was looking up at Patrick now. Are you sick too? He asked. Patrick looked down at him. Just picking up my blood pressure stuff, he said. Nothing exciting. Aiden considered this. My ear hurts, he said. I know, Patrick said. The medicine's gonna help. There was something in the way he said it. Not to Lena but to Aiden, directly, like a person talking to another person. That caught in her chest. They walked out together without quite planning to. The parking lot was gray and cold, a thin November wind moving dead leaves across the asphalt. Lena stopped to zip Aiden's jacket up to his chin and when she straightened up, Patrick was still there. You're local? He asked. Millbrook, she said. The dry cleaners on the avenue. Hendricks? He said. That's the one. He nodded slowly like something had arranged itself in his mind. I used to bring my daughter's dance recital costumes there, years ago. She stopped dancing. Something moved across his face. Not grief exactly, or not only that. Grew up, he said. She's at college now, Oregon. He said Oregon the way people say the name of a place that has taken something they loved. Lena looked at him. There was a story there that she could feel without asking for. You doing this alone? He said. He said it without judgment, the way someone asks because they recognize the shape of a thing. She laughed and it came out a little more tired than she intended. Yeah, 3 years now. He looked at Aiden, who had sat down on the curb in the way that children do when they are exhausted and have run out of social patience entirely. His fever been bad? Patrick asked. 4 days. Does he eat when he's sick? Not much. There's a place on Dunmore Street, Hardley's, he said. They do this chicken soup that my daughter used to swear by when she was sick. It's actual soup, not the canned stuff, noodles from scratch. He paused. Ridiculous as it sounds, I always thought it worked better than half the cold medicine. Lena smiled. I've seen it, always seemed like a nice place. The owner, Barbara, she's good people. He looked slightly away, then back. I could, if you wanted, and if he's up for it, we could get soup. You don't have to, I'm not trying to. He stopped. He did not seem like a man who struggled to finish sentences often, but he was struggling now. Okay, Lena said. He looked at her. Okay, she said again, soup sounds good. Hartley's was warm in the way that old diners are warm, with the particular smell of coffee that has been brewing since early morning and bread that someone baked in the back. The booths were wood, worn smooth at the edges. There were paper placemats with drawings of autumn leaves. Aiden slid into the booth and immediately put his head down on his folded arms, which Lena took as a sign that he was comfortable, not worse. Patrick ordered the soup for all three of them without looking at the prices, and coffee for himself and Lena, and a hot chocolate for Aiden that arrived in a thick ceramic mug with a handle Aiden could wrap both hands around. They talked, not the kind of talking that fills silence but the kind that happens when two people have both been tired for a long time and find themselves briefly in a place that is warm. Patrick had run a small contracting business for 15 years, mostly residential work, additions and repairs and the occasional full gut renovation. His wife had died 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer, caught late. He had raised his daughter alone from the time she was 12, which meant he had raised her through the worst of it and the best of it, through the years when she didn't want to talk to him and the years when she called him twice a week from Oregon and he saved the voicemails because they made the house less empty. He was not wealthy. He was not a billionaire son or a businessman with a black card and a name on a building. He was a man who had a contracting business that paid its bills most months, who drove a truck that was 10 years old, who bought his coffee from the gas station because the gas station was on his way. He had simply been behind her in line. He had simply heard. Lena told him about the dry cleaners. About Aiden's father. About the night Aiden was born during a February ice storm and she had gripped her husband's hand and felt, for the first and one of the only times in her life, completely certain of something. She had been certain of that boy the moment she heard him. She had never been uncertain of him since, even when everything else fell apart. Aiden woke up enough to eat half his soup and all of his hot chocolate and then fell asleep with his head on Lena's arm in the booth, breathing steadily, his color slightly better, or maybe she was imagining it. Patrick looked at him the way people look at sleeping children when they remember something. She used to sleep like that, he said. Anywhere, didn't matter. Doctor's waiting room, car, middle of a sentence, just gone. Do you miss it? Lena asked. Every single day, he said. And I'm proud of her every single day, so. He shrugged. You hold both things. Before they left, while Aiden was being slowly coaxed back into his jacket, Patrick wrote something on a paper napkin and pushed it across the table. My number, he said. Not pressure, but if you need something, if the prescription has an issue, if the car breaks down, if you just need, I don't know. He looked slightly embarrassed, which was the first time he had looked embarrassed. I know what it's like to not have enough people in your corner. Lena looked at the napkin. Then she took out her phone and saved the number. Thank you, Patrick, she said. Get some rest, he said. Both of you. He held the door for them on the way out and then walked to his truck, a faded blue pickup with a magnetic sign on the side that said, Bell Contracting, Residential, Licensed and Insured, and a dent in the rear bumper that had clearly been there for years and had not been considered worth fixing. She watched him drive away. Aiden looked up at her. Is he your friend? He asked. She thought about it. I think so, she said. Yeah. That night, after the antibiotic, after the second medication given with apple juice because it tasted terrible on its own, after the third reading of the same picture book because Aiden kept falling asleep before the ending and waking up insisting they start over after all of it, when the apartment was quiet and the November wind was doing something low and constant against the windows, Lena sat at the kitchen table. She did not do the math. For once, she did not move the numbers around. She sat and thought about the pharmacy and the worn canvas jacket and the way a man who had been through his own worst years had heard a stranger's trouble and not looked away. She thought about Patrick telling Aiden that the medicine was going to help, not to her, not around him, but to him, like he was worth talking to directly. She thought about his daughter in Oregon, and the voicemails he saved, and the costumes that used to come into Hendrix on the avenue before a little girl grew up and took the habit of dancing somewhere else. There were people in the world who had lost things and become harder because of it, and people who had lost things and become quieter and more attentive, who noticed the person at the pharmacy counter turning pale and did not look at their phone. She had found one of the second kind today, in a parking lot in November, between the cold medicine rack and the asphalt. Aiden's fever broke sometime in the night. She found him in the morning sitting up in bed, suspicious and slightly confused by the absence of the heat he had carried for 5 days, pressing his own hand against his forehead the way she had done, as if checking whether he was still who he'd been. "How do you feel?" she asked from the doorway. He thought about it with the seriousness a 7-year-old applies to important questions. "Hungry," he said. She laughed and it came out clean, no undertow of exhaustion, just a sound. She made eggs and toast and let him put too much butter on the toast because he was sick, or had been, and because some things are worth the extravagance. He ate all of it. He asked twice if he could watch something. He told her about a dream he'd had about a submarine. She texted Patrick from the kitchen while Aiden was distracted by his show. "He's better, fever broke, thank you again for everything." The reply came 20 minutes later. "Really glad to hear it. Take care of yourself too, Lena." She stood in the kitchen with the phone in her hand and the toast smell still in the air and the low winter light coming through the window over the sink, and for a moment she let herself feel it, not happiness exactly, not yet, but something adjacent to it, the particular relief of a morning that has turned out better than you were prepared for. She set the phone down and went to sit on the couch with her son, who was already explaining the submarine dream in a level of detail that would have been exhausting any other morning, and today was only good. That was enough. For today, that was everything. Over the next several months, she and Patrick talked, not all at once, not in a rush, not with the urgency of people trying to outrun their loneliness. The way people talk when they have both learned that rushing things does not make them better. He came into the dry cleaners one afternoon in December with work clothes and they made plans for coffee. Coffee became dinner, once, with Aiden present, at a diner that had a kids' menu with cartoons on the paper placemat that Aiden colored with the crayons they kept in a small cup by the register. Patrick had talked to Aiden about submarines because Lena had mentioned the dream, and Aiden had stared at him with the absolute focus children give to adults who take their interests seriously. It was ordinary. It was terrifyingly ordinary, and she did not take a single moment of it for granted. In March, one of the regular customers at Hendrix, a woman named Gloria who brought in linens and spoke to Lena like a person and had for 3 years, mentioned that a friend of hers ran a small property management office and needed someone with organizational skills and reliability and the capacity to handle more than one thing at once. Gloria said this while looking at Lena in the particular way of someone who has been waiting for the right moment for a while. Lena interviewed on a Thursday afternoon after Aiden was at school. She wore the blazer she kept clean and pressed because some things you keep ready even when you don't know what you're keeping them ready for. They offered her the job the following Monday. It was not a dramatic thing. There was no ceremony. She called Patrick from the parking lot after she hung up with them, and he answered on the second ring, and when she told him, he was quiet for a second and then he said, "Lena, that's wonderful," and he said it like he meant it, which was the only way she had ever heard him say anything. She started work in April. She was nervous the first week and certain by the end of the second. Aiden turned 8 in May. She took him and 2 friends from school to a place with go-karts and pizza, and Patrick came and stood near the track watching the small boys careen around the corners with the satisfied expression of someone exactly where they want to be. In November, a year to the month after the pharmacy, Lena was in the grocery store on a Wednesday evening picking up the things she needed for the week. She had a list. The numbers on the list added up comfortably. She was not counting in her head. She was in the aisle by the canned goods when she saw a woman a few years younger than herself with a toddler on her hip and another child pulling on her sleeve, standing very still in front of a shelf, doing something with her eyes that Lena recognized the way you recognize a road you have driven in the dark. The woman was counting. Lena stood in the aisle for a moment, then she walked over. "Excuse me," she said, "I'm sorry to interrupt. She stopped. She thought about how to say it. "Do you need a hand?" The woman looked at her. Cautious, slightly embarrassed, not yet sure. "I'm Lena," she said. "I've been where you are, not exactly, but close enough." The woman's name was Dana. She had a 6-month-old on her hip and a 4-year-old at her knee and a husband who was between jobs and a cart that was not yet full and a face that had been holding it together for a while without any help. They stood in the canned goods aisle and Lena said, quietly, that she had been there. She said the math was brutal and the exhaustion was real and it didn't stay like that forever, and she knew that was hard to believe from inside it. Then she said, "Let me get your groceries today." Dana shook her head. Lena smiled. "Someone did it for me," she said. "Not a billionaire, just a regular person who happened to be standing in the right place." She paused. "Let me pass it on." Dana looked at her for a long moment. The toddler grabbed a strand of Lena's hair and she gently unpeeled the small fist and held it for a second before giving it back. "Okay," Dana said softly. They went through the store together, and Lena paid at the register without ceremony, and they stood in the parking lot for a few minutes in the November cold while the 4-year-old demonstrated something with his shoes that he felt was important. Driving home, Lena thought about pharmacies and parking lots and the way a single person, on an ordinary day, can make the difference between someone surviving a week and someone feeling, if only for an hour, that they are not completely alone. She thought about Patrick, who was making dinner at her apartment tonight because it was Wednesday and that was what they did now on Wednesdays, and Aiden, who had long since given Patrick a proprietary claim on the television remote and consulted him on matters of submarine engineering and the correct method for making hot chocolate. She thought about the morning the fever broke. About the eggs with too much butter. About the submarine dream. She thought about Dana in the parking lot, loading bags into a car, and the toddler on her hip, and the way a person's shoulders can change when something that was held too tight is finally, briefly, let go. She did not think of herself as someone who had been saved. She thought of herself as someone who had been reminded, at the right moment, by the right person. That kindness is not a transaction and not a miracle. It is a practice. You receive it and you carry it forward and you put it down in front of someone who needs it more than you do right now. And then the world, quietly, goes on. I keep thinking about the way Patrick said it, not to me. To Aiden. The medicine's gonna help. Just like that, direct and calm, to a 7-year-old boy he had never met before that afternoon. That small thing, the choice to speak to a child like he was worth speaking to, told me everything I needed to know about who Patrick was before I even learned his name. There's something I've come to believe, not from a book or a sermon, but from the years that have grounded into me slowly. The way a person treats someone who can do nothing for them is the truest thing about them. Patrick didn't know Lena. He didn't know Aiden. He was behind a stranger in a pharmacy line on a gray November afternoon, and he could have looked at his phone or stared at the ceiling. He didn't. He heard and he acted, and he didn't make a production out of it. That kind of decency, quiet, unperformed, just there, is rarer than people admit. It's also the only kind that means anything. What I find myself returning to is not the gesture itself but what it unlocked. Because Lena didn't receive Patrick's kindness and become passive. She received it and became more herself. She went to that job interview. She showed up prepared. She built something, month by month, with the same hands that had been moving numbers around a kitchen table at midnight trying to make them add up. The kindness opened a door. She walked through it. Nobody can do that part for you. I think that's important to say. The world can offer you a moment of grace, but grace alone doesn't change a life. What changes a life is what you do after, what you carry forward. What you refuse to put down even when it's heavy. And then there's what Lena did in that grocery store aisle, 1 year later. She saw Dana and she recognized her, not her face but her posture, the specific stillness of a person doing math they can't make work. And she didn't walk past. She stopped and she said, "I've been where you are." That sentence is one of the most powerful things one human being can say to another. Not "I pity you." Not "let me fix this." Just, "I know this road." You're not alone on it. That's the thing about paying something forward. It's not really about money. It's about refusing to let your own hard years make you indifferent to someone else's. Lena could have decided that she had survived her difficult season and earned the right to stop thinking about it. She didn't. She kept her eyes open. She kept a part of herself in that pharmacy line, aware, remembering, ready to recognize the next person standing there. I think what Patrick modeled, and what Lena carried forward, is something that doesn't have a tidy name. It's the combination of a good heart, a clear head, and the stubbornness to keep going when the numbers don't add up and the apartment is cold and the child is sick and the help you're hoping for has not yet arrived. Those three things together, the willingness to be decent, the wisdom to know how, and the grit to not give up in the meantime, that's what gets a person through. And more than that, that's what makes a person worth getting through for someone else. Aiden turned Aiden May with too much butter on his toast and a submarine theory and a man at the go-kart track who had shown up and kept showing up. That's how it works, I think, not in grand gestures. In ordinary days chosen again and again.